Welcome, everyone, to Easy History Podcast. We're going on a pretty amazing journey today. We're going to be diving into a period of just massive change, the Second Industrial Revolution. This is, roughly from 1870 to 1914, give or take a few years on either side. It's really when, the modern world as we know it starts to take shape. And, we got a lot of requests from you guys to really dig deep into this era.
It's a fascinating period, that's for sure. I mean, you see so much happening all at once. New technologies, new industries, new social structures, even new ways of thinking about the world. It really is a turning point in human history.
Absolutely. So I guess, where do we even begin? I mean, there's so much to cover.
Well, maybe the best place to start is with kind of the global landscape, where all this innovation was happening. Because unlike the first industrial revolution, which was very much centered in Great Britain, the second one, it's much more spread out geographically. You see the United States and Germany emerging as major players, real powerhouses of industry and technology.
Oh, okay. So like a shift in the global balance of power, kind of.
Exactly. You still have important developments happening in places like Japan, England, of course, still in the mix, France, Belgium, even parts of northern Italy later on. But the real centers of gravity, the places where the biggest changes were happening, they were definitely shifting.
Gotcha. So more geographically diverse. But I mean, in terms of what was happening in factories, was it more of the same? Like were machines still replacing human workers?
Yeah, for sure. That trend of automation that really kicked off in the first industrial revolution, that definitely continues and even accelerates during the second. So you still have, factories becoming more mechanized, machines taking over tasks that used to be done by hand, all of that leading to a massive increase in production.
Okay. So that part sounds familiar. But you said there was something that really set this period apart from the first one, right? Something about energy.
Right. That's the key difference, the thing that really defines the second industrial revolution. New energy sources. We're talking about electricity and petroleum coming onto the scene in a major way, starting to replace coal as the dominant source of power.
So coal's on the way out, and electricity and oil are taking over.
Interesting. So oil, I guess we knew about it before, for lamps and stuff, but what made it, so important all of a sudden?
It all comes down to drilling, really. Before this period, oil was kind of like a niche thing. But then you have these advancements in drilling technology, ways to extract oil from the ground much more efficiently on a larger scale, and that's when things really take off.
Makes sense. So suddenly there's a lot more oil available, and I'm guessing someone figured out how to make a lot of money from that, right? Oh yeah. You can't talk about oil in this era without talking about John D. Rockefeller and his company, Standard Oil. I mean, they basically built an empire on oil. Through mergers, acquisitions, all sorts of business dealings, they ended up controlling something like 90% of the oil industry in the U.S.
Whoa. A near monopoly. I mean, that's insane power, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it raises all sorts of questions about economic power, about, monopolies and the influence of corporations. These are things we're still grappling with today.
Definitely. Now, electricity. That seems even more, I don't know, revolutionary, like a bigger deal even than oil.
Yeah.
How did that become a practical source of power?
Yeah, electricity was a game changer for sure. I mean, think about Thomas Edison and his invention of the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb around 1879. That was a huge deal. Suddenly you could have electric light in homes, in factories, in streets. It's like it transformed everything.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine life without electric light now.
Yeah. Right. And it wasn't just about light. Electricity powered all sorts of new machines, new industries. It was like this whole new wave of innovation was unleashed.
And it wasn't just big factories and stuff. It changed people's everyday lives too, right?
Definitely. I mean, think about it. With electric light, you could work longer hours. You could have a more active nightlife. It's like it extended the day, gave people more time to do things.
It's amazing how much of an impact one invention can have, on everything.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the light bulb. You also had the construction of the first big hydroelectric power plant at Niagara Falls in the 1890s. That was a major milestone, showed that you could generate massive amounts of electricity from a renewable source.
Wow, so they were thinking about renewable energy even back then.
Yeah, well, they were more focused on the power generation aspect, but it's still interesting to think about how some of those early ideas about harnessing natural resources are still relevant today.
Totally. But I also remember hearing something about different systems of electricity. There was some debate about how to best deliver it, right?
Yeah, that's right. You had Edison, who was a big proponent of direct current, or DC, but then you had Nikola Tesla, who came along and developed alternating current, or AC, and like there was this whole battle between the two.
Okay, I vaguely remember this. Wasn't it like a pretty big rivalry, like Edison versus Tesla kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, it was like the tech rivalry of the time. I mean, they were both brilliant inventors, but they had very different visions for the future of electricity.
So what was the big difference between their systems?
Well, the key advantage of Tesla's AC system was that it could be transmitted over much longer distances with much less power loss. Like if you think of electricity flowing through a wire, like water flowing through a pipe, the longer the pipe, the more friction you have and the more pressure you lose.
Right, so like with DC, you couldn't really send electricity very far without losing a lot of power along the way.
Exactly. But AC, with the use of transformers, you could step up the voltage for transmission, which reduced the power loss, and then step it back down for safe use in homes and businesses. It was a much more efficient system.
So Tesla's AC system won out in the end.
Yeah, pretty much. It became the standard for power grids around the world. And like that decision made back then, it still shapes how we get our electricity today.
It's amazing how these like fundamental choices made over 100 years ago still have an impact on us today. But it wasn't just electricity that was changing things up, right? There were huge changes happening in agriculture and food production too, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Agriculture was undergoing a major transformation thanks to, again, technology. You have the introduction of new machinery like tractors powered by internal combustion engines. These things could plow way more land much faster and deeper than, the old animal-drawn plows.
It's more efficient farming leading to climate.
More food. Exactly. And not just more food, but like different kinds of food. You have uh, the development and widespread use of chemical fertilizers. That was another big factor in boosting crop yields.
So you have better machinery and better soil, which means
Much more food being produced. It's one of the reasons why the global population was able to grow so much during this period. It's like they were finally starting to get a handle on the problem of famine.
that's a huge deal, being able to feed everyone. But I mean, even with all that food being produced, you still got to figure out how to like keep it fresh and get it to where it needs to go, right?
Absolutely. And there were like some major breakthroughs in food preservation and distribution during this time. Canning techniques got better so food could be stored for longer. And then you have refrigeration starting to come into play, first in industrial settings and then slowly making its way into homes.
So people could actually keep food cold without like ice boxes and all that.
Exactly. And then there's this guy, Louis Pasteur. You might have heard of him. He did some groundbreaking work on what we now call pasteurization. It's basically heating liquids like milk to a specific temperature for a short time, which kills off harmful bacteria and makes the food safer and, it lasts longer.
So pasteurization, refrigeration, canning, all these things combine to like really change how people ate, right?
Yeah, it was a huge step forward in terms of food safety and, just having a more stable food supply, especially in cities where more and more people were living.
Right. And speaking of health, this era was also a time of like massive advancements in medicine, right?
Oh, absolutely. Medicine was making some like truly incredible leaps forward during this time. You have guys like Louis Pasteur again and Robert Koch who were pioneers in developing vaccines.
Vaccines, yeah, those are pretty important.
Huge. I mean, they basically revolutionized how we fight infectious diseases. Diseases like rabies, tuberculosis, cholera, these were things that killed millions of people for centuries.
Yeah, right. It's hard to imagine a world without vaccines now.
And it wasn't just vaccines. Scientists were also making progress in understanding and treating other diseases like malaria and the plague, which were like major scourges at the time.
Wow, so like huge strides in preventing and treating diseases. But it wasn't just about fighting off illness, right? There were also big changes in how doctors diagnosed and treated conditions.
Absolutely. This period saw the introduction of some really powerful new tools and techniques. One of the biggest ones was X-rays.
X-rays. Yeah, those are pretty handy.
Yeah, they were a game changer. I mean, think about it. Before X-rays, the only way to see inside someone's body was to like cut them open. But with X-rays, suddenly you could see bones, organs, all sorts of stuff without surgery.
So much better diagnosis. That must have been a huge relief for both doctors and patients.
Right. And then you have the introduction of anesthesia like ether and chloroform. I mean, can you imagine having surgery without anesthesia?
Ugh, I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal before that.
Yeah.
And then you have aspirin being developed for pain relief. So like All of these things combine, better diagnosis, better pain management. It made surgery a much more viable option and a lot safer.
So people are living longer, healthier lives thanks to all these medical advancements. But it wasn't just about what was happening inside people's bodies. This era also saw the development of some pretty amazing new materials, right?
Totally. The materials revolution was a huge part of this period. Like, think about steel. It had been around for a while, but it was really expensive and difficult to produce in large quantities.
So not really practical for most uses.
Right. But then, in the mid-19th century, you have this invention called the Bessemer converter. It basically revolutionized steel production, making it much cheaper and faster to make large amounts of steel.
So suddenly steel is everywhere.
Pretty much. And that paved the way for all sorts of new things. Railroads, bridges, skyscrapers.
Skyscrapers. Wow, so those iconic buildings that define so many cities, those wouldn't have been possible without the Bessemer converter.
Not really, no. I mean, not on that scale. Steel was the key ingredient that allowed them to build these massive structures.
That's incredible. And what about, like, dynamite? I mean, that's a pretty explosive invention, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, dynamite. That was the brainchild of Alfred Nobel, the guy who established the Nobel Prize. And it's kind of ironic because dynamite was a very powerful and destructive invention, but Nobel himself was really troubled by its potential for causing harm.
So he used his fortune from dynamite to, like, fund prizes for people who were doing good in the world.
Exactly. He wanted to encourage peace and scientific progress. It's kind of a reminder that technology can be used for good or bad. It all depends on how we choose to use it.
It's a powerful message for sure. And it wasn't just about metals and explosives. This period also saw the invention of entirely new types of materials, like plastics.
Right. Yeah, plastics were a big deal. I mean, think about it. Before plastics, most everyday objects were made from wood, metal, glass, natural materials. But then scientists started figuring out how to create these synthetic materials with all sorts of different properties and uses.
So plastics were like this, like, totally new thing, a completely different way of thinking about materials.
Absolutely. And it started with celluloid, which was the first commercially successful plastic. It was used for all sorts of things like photographic film, toys, even early movie film.
Wow, so, like, the birth of the movie industry was partly due to the invention of plastic.
In a way, yeah. And then, later on, you have the development of nylon, another synthetic fiber that revolutionized the textile industry.
So we have these new sources of energy, advancements in food production and medicine, amazing new materials. All of this must have had a huge impact on how people moved themselves and their goods around.
Oh, yeah. The transportation revolution was a huge part of the second industrial revolution. I mean, it's when you have the invention of the automobile, the airplane, the expansion of railroads, it's like the world suddenly got a whole lot smaller.
So break it down for me. Like, how did the automobile come about?
Well, it was kind of a confluence of different inventions, all coming together at the right time. You had the development of the internal combustion engine, which was a big deal, obviously.
Right, so like a new way to power vehicles.
Exactly. And then you have the invention of the pneumatic tire, the kind of tires we use today. That was a big improvement over the old solid rubber tires.
So a more comfortable ride.
Yeah, and more efficient, too. And then you have a bunch of different inventors working on, like, putting all these pieces together, the engine, the tires, the chassis.
And who's the one who finally, like, puts it all together and creates the first car?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but Carl Benz is generally credited with building the first practical automobile in 1886.
So Benz gets the credit, but there are probably a lot of other people working on similar things at the same time, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was like this race to create the first car. And pretty soon after Benz, you have all these other car companies popping up, like Fiat, Peugeot, all the big names we know today.
So the automobile is born, but it was still a pretty, exclusive thing at first, right? Like, not everyone could afford a car.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a luxury item at first. But then you have Henry Ford coming along and changing everything with his revolutionary approach to manufacturing the assembly line.
The assembly line, yeah, that was a game changer for sure.
Totally. Ford took the idea of specialized labor, where each worker does one specific task, and combined it with this moving conveyor belt. So instead of one skilled worker assembling a whole car, you had a bunch of workers, each doing one simple, repetitive task as the car moved along the line.
So like one guy puts on the wheels, another guy installs the engine, and so on.
Exactly. And this, dramatically sped up production and made cars way more affordable. I mean, Ford's Model T, the one that's famous for being available in any color as long as it's black.
Right. Because black paint was the cheapest, right?
Exactly. That car, it sold for like $850, which was a lot of money back then, but it was still much cheaper than other cars on the market.
So Ford's assembly line makes cars more affordable, which means
More people can buy them. And that's exactly what happened. The Model T became like the first mass-produced car, and it really changed the landscape of America.
it put America on wheels, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And Ford was also kind of a pioneer in terms of labor relations. He famously paid his workers a much higher wage than other factories at the time.
I remember hearing about that. Wasn't it like $5 a day?
Yeah, which was like double the average wage at the time. And his reasoning was that if his workers could afford to buy his cars, it would create a bigger market for his product.
Pretty smart, actually. So he's increasing production, making cars more affordable, and paying his workers more. Sounds like a win-win, right?
Well, it was definitely a big step forward in some ways, but it also had its downsides. Working on an assembly line could be pretty monotonous, pretty dehumanizing. You're just doing the same simple task over and over again.
Right, like you're not really building a car, you're just like tightening a bolt all day long.
Exactly. And that kind of work, it can lead to alienation, a feeling of disconnection from your work, from the final product.
It's like the human cost of efficiency, kind of.
Yeah, something like that. So Fordism, it was a mixed bag for sure, but it definitely had a huge impact on the world.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Now, what about other forms of transportation, like railroads, ships? Were they changing too during this time?
Oh, yeah, big time. Railroads were still expanding rapidly, connecting more and more places, making it easier to transport goods and people over long distances.
And what about ships? Were they getting bigger, faster?
Totally. And they were also switching from sail power to steam power, which made them more reliable and efficient. But even with all these advancements, the sea could still be a dangerous place, as the sinking of the Titanic in 1912 tragically demonstrated.
Right, a stark reminder that even with all our technology, nature can still be a powerful force.
And this was also the time when humans finally figured out how to fly, right?
Yep, the dawn of aviation. The Wright brothers, their first successful flight in 1903, that was a moment that changed the world forever.
And that was made possible by, the internal combustion engine, right? The same technology that was powering cars.
Exactly. It's amazing how one invention can lead to so many others, And it wasn't just airplanes. This era also saw the development of other flying machines, like dirigibles, those big airships filled with hydrogen.
So people were really starting to take to the skies in a big way. But what about communication? How are people communicating with each other over long distances during this time? Well, communication was undergoing a revolution of its own. You have the telegraph, which had been around for a while, but it was really starting to connect the world in new ways. And then in 1876, you have the invention of the telephone.
The telephone, that's a big one.
Huge! I mean, suddenly you could have a real-time conversation with someone miles away. It was like magic.
It's hard to imagine life without the telephone now. And it wasn't just about talking over wires. This period also saw the invention of wireless communication, right?
Yep. Guglielmo Marconi, he was the pioneer of wireless telegraphy, which eventually led to the development of radio. It's like suddenly you could send signals through the air without any wires.
That's incredible. And that paved the way for, radio broadcasts and eventually television and the internet and all the ways we communicate today.
Exactly. It's like this whole chain reaction of innovation. And let's not forget about photography, which became more accessible during this time, and the development of cinema by the Lumiere brothers. I mean, these were powerful new ways to capture and share images and stories.
It's like the world was becoming more interconnected, more visually oriented. But it wasn't just about applying existing scientific knowledge. This era also saw some fundamental discoveries that changed how we understand the universe itself, right?
Absolutely. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a golden age for scientific discovery. You have the work of Marie and Pierre Curie on radioactivity, which totally revolutionized our understanding of matter and energy.
Maria Curie, yeah, she was an amazing scientist.
Truly groundbreaking. And she was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields.
Wow, that's impressive. And then there's, of course, Albert Einstein and his mind-blowing theories of relativity.
Right, Einstein. His work was like a paradigm shift in physics. His special theory of relativity, published in 1905, introduced this famous equation, EM-SES, which basically says that energy and mass are equivalent.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
It is, but it's also incredibly elegant and profound. And it has all sorts of implications, from nuclear weapons to our understanding of the universe.
Right, it's like it changed everything.
And then in 1915, she publishes his general theory of relativity, which was even more groundbreaking. It basically redefines gravity, not as a force, but as a curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy.
Okay, now my head is really spinning.
It's pretty mind-bending stuff, but it's also incredibly important because it helps us to understand things like black holes, the expansion of the universe, all sorts of things that were totally mysterious before.
So Einstein was basically rewriting the laws of physics.
Yeah, pretty much. And alongside Einstein, you have other brilliant minds making groundbreaking discoveries. Charles Darwin with his theory of evolution, Sigmund Freud with his work on psychoanalysis, James Clerk Maxwell with his work on electromagnetism. It was like this explosion of scientific knowledge.
It's amazing how much progress was made in such a short period. But all of this technological and scientific change, it must have had a huge impact on society itself, right? Like, how did everyday life change for ordinary people?
Oh, yeah. The societal transformations were massive. I mean, you have the rise of mass production, which led to a greater availability of goods, making things more affordable and accessible to more people.
So like a rise in consumerism.
Exactly. People had more money to spend, and there were more things to buy, and this led to the growth of big department stores, places where you could find all sorts of goods under one roof.
And what about the population? Was it growing during this time?
Oh, yeah, big time. Thanks to advances in agriculture and medicine, the global population was exploding. It went from like 1.2 billion to 1.7 billion in just a few decades.
Wow, that's a lot of people. And where were all these people living?
More and more people were moving to cities. It was the era of urbanization. People were leaving rural areas and flocking to urban centers in search of jobs and a better life.
So cities were becoming these like bustling hubs of activity.
Totally. And with electric light, cities could stay up later. It's when you start to see the development of nightlife, entertainment, all sorts of new cultural activities.
It sounds like a pretty exciting time to be alive. And with all this change happening, I guess people were also finding new ways to enjoy their leisure time, right?
Absolutely. You have the birth of the modern Olympic Games, the first games held in Athens in 1896. And then there were these big international expositions, also known as World's Fairs, where countries would showcase their latest inventions and cultural achievements.
So it was a time of great optimism, a belief in progress.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It was the Belle Epoque, the beautiful era. There was this sense that things were getting better, that science and technology were going to solve all our problems.
But it wasn't all rosy, right? I mean, there were also big changes happening in the way work was organized.
Yeah, the workplace was undergoing a major transformation. You have the rise of scientific management, also known as Taylorism, which was all about efficiency, breaking down tasks into their simplest components, standardizing procedures, all that.
And that led to the assembly line, which we talked about earlier.
Right. Fordism was basically the application of Taylorism on a massive scale. And while it did lead to increased productivity and lower prices, it also had some negative consequences for workers, making their jobs more repetitive and less fulfilling.
Right, the human cost of efficiency. And it wasn't just the way work was organized. The businesses themselves were changing too, becoming bigger and more powerful.
Totally. You have the rise of big corporations, trusts, monopolies, all these new forms of business organization.
And that led to some problems, right?
Yeah.
Like less competition, higher prices for consumers.
Yeah, for sure. And it also led to economic instability. This period saw a major economic downturn known as the Long Depression, which lasted from 1873 to 1896.
Wow, so like a global recession.
Yeah, pretty much. And it had all sorts of causes. Overproduction, international competition, financial speculation, all sorts of factors.
So how did countries respond to this economic crisis?
Well, most European countries adopted protectionist policies, putting tariffs on imported goods to try and protect their own industries.
So like trying to make it more expensive to buy foreign goods so people would buy domestic goods instead.
Exactly. But that didn't always work so well. It often led to trade wars, which just made things worse.
Right, it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, kind of. And then you have another major response to the Long Depression. Imperialism.
Imperialism, how did that come about?
Well, European powers were facing all sorts of economic problems at home, overproduction, unemployment, all that. So they started looking overseas for new markets and new sources of raw materials.
So they started colonizing more countries in Africa and Asia.
Exactly. They saw these colonies as a way to solve their economic problems, but also as a way to expand their power and prestige.
So this period of incredible progress and innovation also had a dark side. Exploitation, colonialism, all that.
Absolutely. The Second Industrial Revolution was a time of great contradictions. It brought about amazing advancements that improved the lives of millions, but it also created new problems and exacerbated existing inequalities.
So as we've seen, the Second Industrial Revolution was a pivotal era, a time of profound transformation that shaped the world we live in today. It was a time of both great progress and great challenges, and its legacy continues to be felt in countless ways.
Think about it. Many of the issues we grapple with today, things like globalization, automation, economic inequality, these all have their roots in the Second Industrial Revolution. It's a period that's still relevant, still worth studying and understanding.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that history is not just about dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that shaped the world we live in, the choices that were made, and the consequences that followed. And hopefully, by understanding the past, we can make better choices in the present and create a better future.
I couldn't agree more. It's about learning from our mistakes, building on our successes, and constantly striving to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Second Industrial Revolution. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.